Congratulations, you passed the N1. You can officially call yourself bilingual. You can order sushi all by yourself without help. But are you bicultural? That's the real question. What does it mean to be bicultural? A bicultural person who is shaped by both Japanese and foreign values often embodies a unique blend of traits that reflect both cultures' values, behaviors, and worldviews. And here are 10 traits that characterize a bicultural person. Number 1 is adaptability. Can you move smoothly between indirect and direct communication? So if you've ever worked as a simultaneous interpreter or ever watched this process take place, you know it can be quite tricky and quite challenging. Maybe a Western business person would say no, and you may hear a very lengthy explanation in Japanese after that. Or you may hear a very short explanation in Japanese that takes quite a long time because some things just don't translate into English or foreign languages. Number 2 is respect for individualism and hierarchy at the same time. So you'll find that your Japanese colleagues may move up based on seniority rather than what we would call merit in the West. And in the West, a junior salesperson might come in, make a lot of sales, bring a lot of revenue in. We call them a rainmaker at a law firm, but a rainmaker might become partner sooner than somebody who's not bringing in a lot of customers. Or a junior salesperson might come in, make a lot of sales, bring in a lot of revenue, and they'll say, wow, we need you to teach other people how to do this, so we'll make you a sales manager. You could have somebody who's 25 years old managing people that are older than him or her. Now, in contrast, Japan places more emphasis on consensus. I'm not going to say that this happens every single time. A lot of people try to explain Japan in broad, sweeping strokes and say, all Japanese people get along, all Japanese people want to reach consensus. No, you'll find leaders, and sometimes a shadow leader that kind of influences people behind the scenes, and then the boss looks around, takes the temperature in the room and says, here's what we should do. And everybody says, okay, you're the boss, let's do that. That's how it works in practice. Number 3 is bilingual proficiency. You'll see people who can switch between Japanese and a foreign language seamlessly. Now, I do have trouble doing that. Sometimes you'll hear me say a Japanese word in the middle of an English sentence. It'll have English intonation, and it ends up sounding kind of funny. And people have said, you know, your Japanese isn't that good because you use the wrong pitch accent on that word. Actually, I'm just saying it with American pronunciation. So, you know, give me a little slack there. But I have seen people who are perfectly bilingual, who have a conversation with one person in Japanese. Somebody asks them a question in English, they turn around and they can answer in English without even thinking. That's a person who's totally bilingual. Like they say, birds of a feather flock together. Bilingual people usually like to hang around with other bilingual people. They have a shared experience. Sometimes you'll hear them switching between Japanese and English in some cases. It can be quite confusing to try to follow that conversation. But people who've grown up in Japan, foreign parents, maybe went to an international school, you hear them speak one sentence in English, the other person will reply in Japanese, the other person will reply in Japanese, then the other person switches back to English. There's also something called code switching. And this happens with people who maybe grew up in a certain neighborhood and they have a certain way of speaking and they go to a big city. Somebody like maybe going from Kansai to Kanto, when they're with their friends from Osaka, they'll speak in Kansai dialect. They'll speak in their Osaka ben. When they come to Tokyo, sometimes people make fun of them. They say, wow, you sound like you're from Kansai. Well, it's true, they are from Kansai. But they slowly start to learn, you know, if I want to make my business and, you know, personal relationships go really smoothly, I got to speak more like the people in Tokyo. When they get on the phone, suddenly they're speaking Osaka dialect. It can be quite entertaining to watch. I've also seen people who come from a small town, move to a big city. Maybe somebody from Kentucky moves to New York City. They have a Kentucky accent, which I can't do, but they move to New York. When they're doing business and working and, you know, going to the bodega in New York City, they talk like people from New York, or at least more similar to the people in New York, because it's a huge melting pot. You hear like 10 accents while you're waiting for the bus. But when they go back to their hometown, they'll immediately, you know, switch back into, you know, what they grew up with. I do this too. When I speak English to a Japanese person, I speak a certain way. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's not. When I speak to a person from back home, I can sometimes start speaking faster, use more slang, use more cultural references that I've seen in movies, for example.
Really funny. I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
In one of my college classes, there were 2 young women from Vietnam. And when they would speak to each other, they'd speak in Vietnamese. When they spoke to me, they spoke in English. However, when they were talking about something that happened at school, they would throw in a bunch of English words. They'd say something, 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 economics class, something, 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 history professor. And you could tell that they were using context that happened in English, but relating it with Vietnamese grammar. Number 4 is work ethic versus flexibility. So sometimes you'll see a Western colleague who comes in, works super hard, takes a lunch break, comes back from lunch, works super hard. 5 o'clock, got to pick the kids up from school. And their Japanese coworkers will say, you're not doing anything. You're lazy. And in the meantime, they had done maybe more than their other coworkers had in those 8 hours. They're focusing on efficiency and they're focusing on getting home to their family. Whereas by and large, a Japanese colleague would say like, oh, there's still more work to do. I'll stay late. And my coworkers are staying late, so I should stay late too. Even if I don't have anything to do, I'll check emails or I'll work on a presentation and maybe brush it up a little bit more. Number 5 is indirectness versus directness. Now you can tell when a person is slightly bilingual but not bicultural. Sometimes I'll go into a store, I'll say, do you have this item? And if they speak a little English, they'll turn around and say, no. And it's very blunt and it seems a little bit off. What they've heard is that when you speak to Westerners, you have to be more direct. Sometimes I think they take it a little bit too far. That's okay. People are just learning. You'll see this example on a recent video where a tourist was smoking where they're not supposed to be smoking. A Japanese man confronted them.
Don't smoke.
And he was very direct. Probably just sick of seeing tourists break all the rules. But I think also he was maybe an intermediate speaker of English by the way he spoke. And he did know some slang. He came across as a little bit too direct. That's something that people learn when they become bicultural is, yes, Westerners appreciate more directness, but if you're too direct, it can come across as rude. That's just something you got to learn to take the temperature. Now, with Japanese people, it's customary to be more indirect. So you will say, instead of, no, I'm not going to do that, you would say, choto muzukashii desu, or jikan nai desu. It's going to be difficult, or, I don't have time. Kind of let them down easily, maybe lower expectations so they kind of figure out on their own that whatever they're asking for is not going to happen. Now, how does this work in practice? Now, I've had comments from friends that Japanese people just need to learn to be more direct. They can just say, no, it's not going to hurt my feelings. And some Japanese people say, foreigners are too direct. And sure, that's true. I mean, when you're coming from a culture where people are very high context, they give you a bunch of reasons why something's not going to happen, and they want you to figure out, oh, you're trying to say it's not going to happen. Okay, the sale's not going to go through. We're not going to go on that date that I was dreaming about, okay? Okay, you've given me enough context to figure out that, oh, okay, this isn't going to happen. But a lot of Westerners get frustrated. That's just one step on your way to becoming bicultural. Thousands of years of culture, we're not going to rewrite that just by saying you have to be more direct. Now, if you get offended when people are not direct with you, you're not bicultural yet. Like I said, baby steps, just learn as you go. What's your experience in becoming bicultural? Tell me in the comments below. Number 6 is appreciation for tradition versus modernity. Japan's a much older country, so they obviously have more traditions. So the tea ceremony, martial arts, obon, things like that. What really warms my heart is I see younger people going to Japanese temples and shrines, and they still have the coming of age day every January. So a lot of people are still holding on to traditions because it kind of grounds them. It makes them feel part of the culture. But Japanese people also, you'll see them walk out of the shrine and then put their Bluetooth AirPods in and start listening to a podcast or maybe some hip hop. Come from the US, we like to kind of mix things up. We have a startup culture. We want to disrupt. Japan's not really like that. When I was doing software sales, one mistake I made at first was to say, this is going to completely change the way you work. And that would freak people out. What I learned to say is, this is going to increase efficiency by 5% every year. And they were much more comfortable with that, even though we were really changing the way they worked. So how does this work in practice? A lot of young Japanese people still learn the tea ceremony. I see young people learning kendo. And that really warms my heart. So it's not to say one size fits all, because that's always a blunder when you say that Japanese people are like this, Westerners are like this, because Westerners, that could mean a European, American, could mean several different things. So it's very difficult to put people into a category. Number 7 is community-minded versus being independent. In Japan, the overall sense is we're all in this together. Look at the agrarian lifestyle of 1,000 years ago, where rice farmers had to work together. They had to belong to a collective, and if there's a bad rice crop, we got to pool our resources so we all survive. So in the West, we have more of a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of attitude. You're on your own. Number 8 is cultural curiosity. They're fascinated by different things such as sushi and basketball, haiku and hip hop, blending interests that give you a deep appreciation for the culture, as well as embracing new traditions and new ideas. In order to navigate two cultures, you need to develop situational awareness. For me, it was all trial and error. Made a lot of mistakes, embarrassed myself quite a lot. I found out that people were pretty forgiving. And I really appreciate that. Thank you, Japan. But being curious and finding out what's going on in my neighborhood, what's this festival about? Why are people like hanging this fish in the park? And what's that all about? Or why are suddenly in January all these 20-year-olds wearing a kimono and all the girls had their makeup perfectly done, the guys are all dressed up, and why are they all going to the stadium? You got to be curious. You got to ask people, like, why are people doing this? Why do you do it this way? A lot of times, Japanese people are immersed in the culture from birth, so it's just something they just do, and it's not something they can really explain. But there are a lot of good resources out there. Some not so good, but there are some good resources out there. As you become more bilingual, you can read some of those resources on your own in Japanese and get a deeper feel for what this tradition is all about. Number 9 is emotional restraint versus openness. Now, you rarely see public displays of affection in Japan. You rarely see people cry or throw a fit in public. They might just hold it in, and then later, when you get to a private place, they might say, I wanted to tell you something. So a bicultural person might temper their emotions during formal situations, but adopt the US's tendency to openly share feelings with family and close friends. This is not to say that Japanese are 100% restrained all the time and Westerners just blurt out whatever comes to mind whenever they want. Like I said, it's not one size fits all. Just know that if you're dating a Japanese person, they're probably not going to hug you in public. And if you're dating a Westerner, they probably want to hold your hand when you're walking down the street. Number 10 is a global perspective. They're able to see the world through 2 different sets of glasses. They put on their Japanese glasses and their foreign glasses at times. Japan has a really nuanced, high context culture, contrasting with the US's diverse and low context culture. It's a melting pot, giving a broader, adaptable outlook. That's why I say that you can't say that all Americans think this, because it's very difficult. My Japanese students, when I taught English years ago, would ask me, what do Americans eat for breakfast? That's one of the hardest questions I ever got. Like I said, it's not one size fits all when it comes to being bicultural. More than being indirect with their Japanese friends and colleagues and direct with Westerners, a truly bicultural person knows when to be direct and when to be indirect. And that's the balance you strike as you're walking this tightrope of being bicultural. Good luck.